Okay, this coming Sunday at A Place to Talk, we will be talking about persecution and blessing and blessed when it hurts, or blessed when you're persecuted, or blessed when you're when you're pushed out, when you're castricized, when you're castricized. Is that the right word? Not. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about when you're being abused, when you're being persecuted, when you're being taken advantage of, when you're being ridiculed. Um, Now that whole this passage starts with the word blessed, but I'm not talking about hashtag blessed. I'm not talking about blessed because you got a good parking place, or blessed because you found your, I don't know, you found your. I, it's hard, this whole blessing thing. I don't want to trivialize it, and I don't want to make it so that it has to be this most massive thing in the world. But I think that this blessing is more than, I don't know. I think it's more than just these little peripheral things. I think it's this deep down, um, sustaining joy, this sustaining peace, this happiness. Let's just go through the questions, and this is what we're going to talk about this Sunday at A Place to Talk. Here's the text: Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We're going to talk about what is righteousness, what is persecuted, what's the kingdom of heaven like. Here are some questions. Why would Jesus call people blessed when they're being persecuted? Uh, In my mind, blessing and persecution don't go hand in hand. So what was Jesus saying here? Let's talk about it. Let's think about it. You pause this video, you ponder it. Maybe watch this video in clips and you think through these things this week, and you bring something to the table that we talk about this coming Sunday, or comment in the comments here on YouTube. Let's begin this conversation now, and we'll have more to talk about this Sunday. You'll have better questions than I do. You always do. What does it mean to be persecuted for righteousness' sake? Not just for being opinionated or different. What does it mean to be persecuted for righteousness? Can you think of people who were persecuted for righteousness' sake? Third question. In what ways do we avoid standing for truth today because we fear rejection? Good night. You might think, if you look at my social media, you might think, well, Josh, you don't ever uh, avoid standing for what you think is truth, whether you agree with me or disagree. You might think that I never avoid, but that's not true. I I'm a coward so often. I'm so often afraid, if I'm honest about the way I think and feel, will that destroy my business? Will that hurt my relationships? Will I lose friends if I say things that I think are truth and are worth standing for? So yes, I do feel that. What do you call it? That fear of rejection. I have it. It's real. Um, but what ways do we avoid standing for truth because we fear rejection? How does persecution refine or reveal what we really believe about God's kingdom? How does persecution refine or reveal? When you're persecuted, and and maybe you've not been persecuted like maybe say the Palestinians are, where they're being pushed out of their homeland. You might say, Josh, that's not persecution for righteousness. They're just living and they're being persecuted. Yeah, well, they're just being persecuted for being alive, right? Um, but some of you might say, well, but the Israelis are trying to do God's work and take over the land because God promised it to them, and they're being persecuted for righteousness, and the right thing for them to do, the righteous act, is pushing others out. Well, I don't think that way. But what does it mean to be persecuted for righteousness' sake, and how does persecution refine? Does persecution Is persecution like sandpaper that smooths our rough edges off? Is persecution like an anvil that cracks us open and reveals what we really believe about God's kingdom? When you have experienced pushback for doing the right thing, what did it teach you? Have you ever experienced pushback for doing what you believe was sincerely the right thing? How can we support one another when following Jesus leads to misunderstanding or loss? How can we support each other when following Jesus leads to misunderstanding or loss? For me, the most the most righteous thing I believe in my personal life is probably not actions or things that I've done or said. It's a core belief that I believe aligns with Jesus's teaching. And that is when you're in a situation and somebody has to get hit, or somebody has to get taken advantage of, or somebody has to, in here I know that the Jesus thing would be to say, "Hey, I volunteer. I volunteer to be hit. I volunteer to be taken advantage of. Let's make this work out for everybody else and let me be the one that takes the loss." In my business, I feel like I've always thought that way. Like, um, if something happens and the market changes and somebody that I'm doing a mortgage for, their rate's going to get worse. Sometimes, if it's possible, I'll just take the loss. I'll try to make it work for them, even if it means I get paid less or don't get paid at all. There are rules in place that prevent some of that, and then there's people that that work in my team that my work benefits, and that causes me to go, do I pull the rail and and switch the tracks and save these people or hurt these people? But I always want to do what's best for others, even even when I don't have the courage to actually go through with it and do what's best for others. I know that that's the right thing to do, which is why I think we should put down our nuclear weapons, put down our guns, get you know say that we are opposed to war all the time. And people would say, well, but war should be defensive. And yeah, I think it should just not exist. Now, do I play that out in practice? I don't know. I haven't been in a life and death situation where I had to say, okay, if somebody has to die here, let it be me. But I know here, or I believe here, that that's what Jesus would want. Good night. I'm sorry. I feel like every conversation for me comes back to self-sacrifice, but that's the message in my mind. That's the message of Jesus. And you say, Josh, nobody's going to sign up for that. Yeah, I get it. You say, Josh, a place to talk may never have a big audience because people don't buy that. They don't want to sign up for that. I get that. I understand. I hear you. So I want to go back through these questions. I know I'm taking too long. Why would Jesus call people blessed when they're being persecuted? What does it mean to be persecuted for righteousness' sake, not just for having an opinion, being opinionated or different? In what ways do we avoid standing for truth today because we fear rejection? How does persecution refine or reveal what we believe about God's kingdom? When have you experienced pushback for doing the right thing, and what did it teach you? How can we support one another when following Jesus leads to misunderstanding or loss? All right, let's look at these early church fathers. Ignatius of Antioch said, "Let me be food for the wild beasts." Uh, the earliest Christians saw this as very, very literal, literally being persecuted and maybe killed. Tertullian said, "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church." And Origen of Alexandria said, "The more intense the persecution, the more the spirit strengthened, for faith is not tried in ease and leisure." I mean, these are the early church fathers saying massive things about laying down their life. What the earliest Christians knew about being blessed when it hurts. The earliest followers of Jesus, sorry if you hear the dogs howling in the background, that's just the a fire truck or an ambulance went by, and so they have to try to mimic it. What the earliest Christians knew about being blessed when it hurts, the earliest followers of Jesus didn't treat persecution as proof that God had abandoned them. When they saw it as evidence that their lives had begun to look like his. Ignatius welcomed the lions of Rome as if they were gatekeepers to heaven. Tertullian stood defiant before emperors, convinced that every drop of Christian blood only planted more seeds of faith. And Origen, bruised and scarred from imprisonment, taught that trials were the forge where faith became unbreakable. You know, a forge is that metal thing that you're beating thing, you know, that you're maybe you're shaping a knife or a horseshoe on it. It's the Together they remind us that the kingdom of heaven doesn't belong to those who avoid pain, but to those who endure it for what is right. Um, I've been thinking about, that's the early church fathers, and how has that changed throughout time? And it got me to thinking, and these are my words, and I'm gonna read this to you again. And I take my words here, and I let AI edit them because I'm trying to get this point across, what I'm trying to say here. The problem with Reformation theology and persecution, many today who have been raised in Reformation theology, I was raised in penal substitutionary atonement, which means that God punishes his son on our behalf. Kind of Jesus takes our punishment that God wanted to give us, but he puts his son in between us, and Jesus takes our punishment. But those of us who have been raised in that Reformation theology morphed into a type of Christian nationalism. So what's happened is now we've got this whole move of Christian nationalism married to or mixed with Reformed theology, and they've lost interest in personal righteousness and instead read the passage as imputed righteousness. So just like Jesus took our place, he our righteousness was replaced with his righteousness. And by wearing the title of Christianity married to nationalism, they imagine their righteousness is imputed due to their association with the term Christian and the political party that touts Christianity. And in so doing, they feel persecuted when others speak about community, justice for immigrants, care for the poor and needy, the underpaid and the uninsured. So here's what's going on. Instead of doing things that they would call woke and doing things that are compassionate for immigrants and care for the poor and care for the needy and care for people that are underpaid and underinsured, instead of doing those acts, what has happened is they've said, oh, my righteousness is just imputed from Christ. Let me see if I can say it better when AI interprets it for me. Let's try again. Many raised on Reformed theology or Christian nationalism mixed with it have lost interest in personal righteousness, misinterpreting this passage as imputed righteousness. Claiming Christian nationalist identity, they believe their righteousness is imputed through this association and the supporting political party. They feel persecuted when challenged on issues of community, justice for immigrants, care for the poor, needy, and underpaid, underinsured. I kept asking AI, make this better. I wanted to figure out how to say what I was trying to say. Here's the third attempt, or the second attempt. Many adherents to contemporary Reformed theology often morphed into a type of Christian nationalism or mixed with Reformed theology have increasingly sidelined the pursuit of personal righteousness. Instead, they interpret this passage solely through the lens of imputed righteousness. Could you, as I think about that, I think if there were an ontological Satan or a devil, what better thing could he do than to take all of the people that want to do good and right and take away from them this desire to do good, kind, healthy, loving things, and instead replace it with this idea that you can do all the bad in the world. If you just say a prayer, it gets erased, and Jesus' righteousness goes in your place, and that's all you need. That's horrible. It's horrible because it it delivers us from the need to do right. By adopting the label of Christianity coupled with nationalism, they mistakenly believe their righteousness is imputed simply through their association with the term Christian and a particular political party that champions Christianity. Consequently, they perceive themselves as persecuted whenever discussions arise concerning community, justice for immigrants, care for the poor, needy, and underpaid and underinsured. So, so what, Josh, what's your point? My point is we've got a lot to discuss. Let's talk about these things. Why would Jesus call people blessed when they're being persecuted?